Today's webinar will be on building the ATM grade networks with full security, full safety, and full redundancy. And as you can see, we have three panelists that we'll be listening to, I should say from. Uh, the three are from the manufacturer side, Nokia, Benoit Leriron. Benoit is a worldwide business development director at Nokia, responsible for transportation, marketing, including ANSPs. In his role, he is deeply involved in customer projects in the pre-sales phase to understand customer applications and requirements in order to define the proper solution for the evolution of their network infrastructures towards IP. Benoit has over 30 years of experience in telecom, pre-sales management, background, current enterprise, career markets for data, voice solutions, and has joined Alcatel-Lucent in 2010 after holding different pre-sales management positions at companies such as Wellfleet, Bay Networks, and Nortel. Thank you, Benoit. From the ANSP side, we have Martin Hogan, comes from AirNav Ireland, experienced ATM specialist in network and security domain, working as a project manager and technical lead delivering safety critical infrastructure programs within the air traffic management environment, deploying operational network solutions, ensuring full compliance with regulatory requirements, industry standards, while maintaining safety, resilience, and operational integrity. Thank you, Martin. And consultant from Obisco, we have Burham Okagulu, and Burham, fix that later on. Burham is a telecommunications engineer with more than 30 years experience in ATM after having worked 10 years at Eurocontrol on development of the European mobile data link strategy and on delivery of CNS technical training. He founded Obisco in 2001 and now operational in Luxembourg, Belgium, and France, Spain, and Italy to provide CNS consultancy to all European ATM stakeholders. One of his main missions has been to act on behalf of CETA for 10 years as the operations director of PENS, where he had to ensure reliable mission critical communication services for all European ANSPs and Eurocontrol as they support their international voice and data communication services. So as you can see, we have quite a esteemed panel, and we hope to hear from them. So let's just get started as sort of trying to introduce the conversation. Again, Daniel Vaca, I sit as the nominated member by CANSO to the ICAO Air Navigation Commission. One of the things that has been occurring over the last year and a half, I'm sure almost all of you hopefully know, is that we have had quite an issue with GNS RFI, and because of it, the conversation that ICAO and within other global fora have been regarding resiliency and what we can do about it, how we can improve it, and how we can ensure that we keep a full, safe, and secure system. With that, briefly, the 42nd Assembly, which occurred last year, had the resolution 31.1. If you'll see, it says consolidated statement of continuing ICAO policies and practices related to a global air traffic management system, communications, navigation, surveillance, air traffic management system. In that, it sort of talks about GNSRFI, and then follow on from that, we get into what has been labeled as minimum operational network or required operational network and those type of activities. Sort of keep that as a high level concept or issue, but really the description for this talk will be on ANSPs rely for 100% of their operations on the ground to ground network, requiring more and more security, control, redundancy, but also allowing less and less maintenance windows, and of course, leaving no space for human errors in the operations. With three important actors of this very challenging environment, you'll be learning the constraints of the most critical applications, the evolving constraints of the regulations, the most relevant solutions, and how new networking technologies can serve positively their organizations. And then we can expand on that. You will have an opportunity we'll have questions and answers going back and forth. And at the end, as it was noted, we look forward to your questions too. We have an hour, it's gonna be pretty busy. And if we have issues with acronyms, as I sort of was telling my panelists, please label that in a chat or send them in so that we can at least try and address some of those. Okay, with that, I will turn it over to Benoit. I believe you're first. as an introduction.
Thank you. So I will briefly describe in this chart the end-to-end architecture that we're going to talk about. So on the left-hand side, you see different sites, radar sites, environmental stations, airports, ATC center, connect that host different applications that need to communicate with the right-hand side of the picture where the data is being consumed. So typically in a data center that we now call OT cloud. And in between is the ground-to-ground network, so which is made here separated in three parts where the data is collected, where again in all these different sites, where the data is transported. So this is generally a dedicated network, and I will briefly describe it, that is connecting to the data center fabric, which is hosting all the servers. Right in the middle, we see what again we call the mission critical networks, most of the time done with the technology called IP/MPLS that I'll further describe a bit. We see here a full redundancy. So these networks are generally built with two separated physical networks or duplicate cores or different names for that, but completely separated in order to maximize the availability. And this is also surrounded by an umbrella of security. So on the access side, what we call zero trust, and overall in the transport end-to-end, something that we call quantum safe to secure the application, but we'll go into more details. Where the data is transported, again, two clouds here. I will turn to Martin to describe how these clouds are being made in Ireland, with no irony on the weather in Ireland, Martin.
Thanks, Benoit. So as the ANSP in this discussion, the slide here just quickly reflects our portion of airspace that we control in Ireland. We have geographically the way we're positioned, we're kind of the gateway network into Europe to line up all the air traffic as it comes across the North Atlantic and into European airspace. For the Shanwick part of the air traffic control is a partnership with Prestwick in Scotland, the NATS, our colleagues in the UK. And then in the Irish controlled airspace, we have our ground-based radar, radio, voice services. And as you see in the map of Ireland there to the right-hand side, we have strategically placed all along the Atlantic seaboard there our sites with our own land-based radar and voice sites. We've partnered with Nokia to build out a network to provide us with the safe, secure, resilient network along the western seaboard to enable us to control out into the Atlantic. Next slide, please. And this is just a quick snapshot of that network. We've partnered, as I said, with Nokia to provide the network platform infrastructure. And then we've partnered with our own local telcos. And we've built out a dual, diverse, resilient network out to all those remote sites. We use a fiber-based network from the telecommunications provider AIR. And we have, for the most part, a radio at the edge network with a fiber core. And as I said, we partnered with Nokia to provide us an A and a B. They've also partnered with a number of other ANSPs, and we have a kind of an ANSP user group with that respect. And yeah, so far so good. And yeah, that's a quick snapshot of the airspace that we provide and the network we've built to be able to provide that underpins what the air traffic controllers see on their screen. So that's it for me, and I'm going to hand over to Burhan. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Martin. Some of you might wonder who we are as Obisco. Obisco, by the way, stands for Open Business Consulting, and as mentioned in my bio, I founded it in 2001. And we are there really to act as your local ATM experts. We have local people in various countries, mainly in Europe, that really help you in your projects, in your modernization projects. And these consultancy services include mainly all communication domain, be it air, ground, voice, air, ground data, ground, voice, and ground data, but also air traffic management applications and ATC systems. But we also provide some strategic advice on the business decisions to be taken in terms of investment decision, business modeling, and support to the whole project life cycle, from research and development to procurement to design, operations, and continuous improvement. That's our main area, but we also provide support in terms of training, because people are a key element of a reliable network. And that's why we provide also ATSEP compliant CNS training, technical training mainly, and also support the safety case, building a safety case for communication services. Next slide, please. And our stakeholders, our clients are mainly European, with different sorts of clients. We have ANSPs on the top left, as you can see. We have European institutions such as CESAR, Eurocontrol, the European Space Agencies, ESSP, and then the supply industry such as Thales, IBM, SITA, and a few others like Indra. And also we provide training directly as Obisco or as support to international training organizations such as the Eurocontrol Training Center in Luxembourg, or other training institutions around the globe as guest speakers. And that's about it on our side, and I'll give it back the floor to Daniel.
All right, thank you very much. Now we'll start the panel discussion. As was sort of introduced, we have a little bit of variety in how we're going to be able to do this. Okay, you're all there. Okay, first of all, we'll start with Martin. What are the most critical applications being transported on your network, and what kind of requirements do they have on the network?
As described there previously, we have our own land-based radar and voice and data services positioned along the Atlantic seaboard there along our coastline. So basically, it'll be our operational radar, voice, and data services, like navigational aids as well in the local terminal sites. The critical requirements for us are not necessarily traditional high bandwidth network needs, but rather high availability. Our requirement is to have a highly resilient, secure links are the essential requirements for us. From a technical perspective, we've built an IP MPLS network to bring all our services back to our main air traffic control center. And we've built it really in compliance with the ED 138 network requirements and performances for voice over internet protocol in the air traffic management space. And we built it to satisfy the requirements in that around round trip delay, jitter, packet loss. So those they were always our kind of technically guiding principles. And then to corroborate that and make sure that we're getting that service across the WAN from the different telco providers to all the different sites, we use the Nokia NFMP analytics tool to help us ensure that the telcos that we're using meet the SLA.
As you expand then, what is the availability that you measure on the network? 5x9, more? Where are we on that? And I say that because obviously that is, as we push more and more and we use more and more spectrum, that's going to become more relevant as far as the conversation is concerned, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're always striving for 5.9s. But the best SLA we get from our telcos is 99.95. But because we use dual independent diverse network providers in a kind of an A and a B path strategy, two parallel 99.95s gives us in theory a 99.999, the 5.9s reliability within our network function based on the formula for two systems in parallel. So that's what we're kind of aiming for all the time. But we are aware of the risk of network commonality and the lack of diversity, especially in a small country like Ireland. With but we do go to great lengths with the telco providers to actually work with them and go down to on a hop by hop level of detail to ensure that we are getting a diverse network at the edge and in the core, which is, it's a big ask to ask them to give us and share that level of detail. But fortunately, so far, we've been able to do that.
And although you may not have what I mentioned before, the GNSS RFI conversation, which mainly comes out of, say, areas close to conflicts, right? But you do have a concern, right? Your concern is different on the seaboard, is more weather related as far as maintaining your resiliency, is it not?
Exactly, yeah. So one of the main contributors we have found to outages, in particular on the west coast of Ireland, is the ongoing changing and extreme weather events like storm-related activity. And it has affected both the fiber-based network that we have and the radio-based network we have. We had a particularly bad storm there last year, and a lot of the power was lost to some of the telco exchanges that are part of that network service provision. We had some fiber. Not all fiber is underground. Some of it is over poles. Our challenge on the western seaboard is geography. We have to get to the remote sites. We have to get up on mountaintop. We have to have that reach and reachability. So yeah, it's been radio dish problems. It has been storm related activity, externals factors. To date, the product has been very stable, thankfully, so far. And yeah, they're the contributing factors to any outages that we've seen so far.
Well, having worked within ANSP conversations and things like that, I know that your airspace is very important to North Atlantic operations, right? So the resilience is basically a requirement, and we need to ensure that it stays that way. And thank you for the work that you guys are doing. Farham, let me ask you, do you see a trend in the market to cope with availability challenges?
The trends is in that with the current evolution of the telecom operators, the nightmare of every network engineer and network designer is the hidden single point of failure somewhere within the network, be it at the access layer or at the core layer. Indeed, the strategy of many NSPs is to implement a dual core scenario, two backbones from two different operators, but we still have some potential common failure mode between operators. We call it the beta factor when we do an assessment of the availability calculations of a given design. And something else that we observe is that when we try to implement physical diversity or access layer diversity, we sometimes have better guarantees when we provide it or we do it from the same telecom operator. Instead of doing it one link with one operator, another link with another operator, where they have no real way of guaranteeing diversity between operators. And that's why the dual core approach makes sense, but with the caution in terms of the calculation of the availability factor of this beta factor. And at the access layer, what is key and what is happening is really what we call an audit at the access layer diversity, which means it's a single point of failure audit to avoid any SPOF at layer 1 in terms of cabling, at layer 2 in terms of routers and switches, and at layer 3 at the router level, we have to access to two different point of presence on the telecom operator. But not only, we have also to make sure that at the power supply level, at the cabling level within the building, so it has to go everywhere, this audit. And once an audit is really performed, then it's a kind of miracle, because you unfold most of the hidden stuff in the network, and you get a much stabler network. So audits on hidden stuff is a key way to increase the reliability on the network. And as former director of the PENS project, we really saw a difference before and after this audit has taken place. Nightmare before, paradise after, in summary.
Right.
And
If I could just, I'm sorry if I
yeah.
interrupt you real quick, but and you were, Martin showed that they use two different providers to ensure that they can to sort of mitigate the single point of failure aspect of it, and you've touched on that also. But wouldn't going to a single provider then sort of not provide that redundancy, let's say, in systems? Would that be a concern too, or do you just ensure that the interoperability is there?
As Martin said, we need to provide diversity at access layer and at the core layer. On the access layer, a single provider provides a better guarantee, but at the core level, you need two different backbones, two different cores, two different operators. And I can give you the example of the Pan-European network, PENS, where it was a single core network, and we had a main failure due to a human error that isolated whole Northern Europe for about 30 minutes. That was only once in 10 years, but still it's unacceptable. So dual core is a must, an absolute must. One thing we also underestimate, just to find out, is that cybersecurity attacks can also reduce availability, like DDoS attacks. And therefore, SPOF is one thing, cybersecurity attacks is another thing. And of course, the human error, as mentioned, is a third dimension where we have to mitigate potential human errors through automation and training and right procedures, etc. So,
having had experience with a rather large ANSP in North America, yes, they've experienced all those issues. And the one thing you didn't mention is nefarious action, right? There was a large failure in the U.S. and Chicago Center where there was a fire set, and that created a huge disruption. Right? So that's just an example of it. Benoit, let me just get to you real quick. Do you see a challenge with current technologies being incapable of sustaining expectations?
As you have heard from my colleagues here, for sure there are challenges, but it's more about the telco side. On top, there is technology that is called IP/MPLS that is proven to be very stable. We've used this technology since 25 years, in ANSP since probably 15 years about. So it's again proven to be fulfilling the requirements of ANSPs for three main reasons. The first one is reliability. So it is capable of taking care of a failure in less than a second. We sometimes talk about milliseconds, but I will stop at 1 second. So reliability is one. The second one is control. So you can anticipate what's going to happen to the network in case there is a failure. So that's very important. A traditional IP network, you don't know. With MPLS, you have a set of control capabilities that help you to anticipate what's going to happen to your network if there is a failure. So that's the second, reliability, control. And the third one is flexibility. So on top of these complex architectures that were shown by Martin, for example, you've got a kind of abstraction layer that gives you the possibility of transporting any application, being legacy applications for radars or new applications for remote towers, voice, etc. So you can really transport any kind of applications very securely and configure the network so that it's optimized for this specific application. So these are the three reasons why, from a technological perspective, there is no challenge. We can cope with these complex networks.
Okay. If you don't mind, the three of you, I hope you don't mind. There's a question here that occurred to me. I sort of want to ask from all three of you. Martin, do you see satellites being used for ground-to-ground to potentially cope with fixed network failures? And I'll get the answer from all three of you. How do you see that?
Yes, obviously with satellite, the thing that comes to mind is delay in voice applications. But that said, we're looking at satellite. We're developing our use cases around it. As I said, on the remote sites, we lost visibility some of our sites, and even if we had satellite, just to give us eyes on the site initially as an initial use case, and then explore further the possibility of using ground communications, VHF communications. We're looking at it, and locally in Ireland, there's a kind of government-backed satellite, low orbiting satellite system that the government are encouraging operators of essential services to get involved in and use. And one of our telcos locally has been appointed as a kind of a retail function of that service provision. So yes, we are looking at it. We are looking at it, but very early stages, yeah.
Okay. Brahim, your thoughts on satellite?
Yeah, that's exactly the trend. In European and North American regions, the preferred approach is still a ground dual core architecture for cost efficiency and bandwidth availability reasons and delay. But we see more and more tests ongoing with low Earth orbiting satellite constellations to provide a third layer of redundancy as a last resort capability that is totally independent from the ground infrastructure, such as the Starlink constellation from Elon Musk as an example. In other regions outside Europe and North America, it's the opposite. The satellite links called VSAT, very small aperture terminal connections, are used as a main way of communicating. And there we see the opposite trend that more and more NSPs are looking at providing a second core using ground IP and PLS infrastructure where available and where the performance is good. So yeah, satellites will clearly be used more and more in the near future, definitely.
And there's a lot of conversation at ICAO right now about air-to-ground connectivity, right? So connected air, it's a term that we're using. So you have ground to ground, you have air to ground, and then of course where you end up in critical information, whether it's passed to the EFBs and all these other items that are being discussed right now. Benoit, your thoughts on the satellite connectivity?
I've got nothing to add to what Buran said. I see exactly the same trend. So moving to last resort satellite in Europe and North America, and vice versa, moving away to a fixed network in other regions.
Yeah. And for all three of you, I mean, obviously it's one of the things that would almost ensure resiliency, as you said, dual core facility, operations, right? I'll take a couple questions from the attendees only because I want to keep it into this subject. Martin, will you be able to provide some information if you're using multicast for your radar, ADS-B, and other critical applications? If you're using multicast, can you share about the convergence time?
Yeah, we're using multicast. We're multicasting radar across the WAN. And yeah, it's like as Benoit said, we have the IP MPLS infrastructure. We traffic engineer to utilize the fiber-based network, the land-based network. We're not seeing any issues with delay or convergence or anything like that, thankfully, to date. But yes, we use multicasting. We encrypt across the network. So we have multicast traffic encrypted across the WAN. And we deliver the radar service using multicast.
Okay. Benoit, I think the next question really is for you. It sort of touches on what you were responding to previously is, could you share your assessment of the potential utilization of the internet-based SD-WAN technology within the ATM network environment, specifically challenges and operational considerations should be evaluated when determining whether SD-WAN is a suitable solution for enhancing ATM connectivity?
There has been a hype something like 5 years ago on SD-WAN. It has gained some interest into some retail shops, etc. But the reason why it got traction from ANSPs, it's because of its capacity to load balance traffic. So if you have two networks to react to bandwidth issues, latency issues, packet drops, etc., dynamically. So that looked nice, but it didn't really capture attention from ANSPs for several other reasons. Because again, this feature is nice, but if you look at the rest, reliability is not to the millisecond that I was talking about. It's in seconds and sometimes more in case of a failure. You don't have control, so it's the machine and the networks which are dictating how they would operate themselves. And also the life cycle of products is very short compared to what is expected in NSP. So we're talking about releases every 6 months, software releases, so software upgrades very often. So all over the market, again, I think MPLS is still alive, is still very well positioned for these highly critical networks, and hope that when I'm in the plane, I'm always hoping that no network, ANSP network, is going to be controlled by SD-WAN, to be honest.
Okay, well, at least we don't have to, that's not part of the information when you purchase a ticket.
Yeah.
Burham, question for you just on your comment on low orbit. Are there any performance metrics for the reliability of low orbit satellites?
I don't know them personally. I only know some ANSPs, and I've talked with them about what's the performance, and the high level comment was extremely good, highly reliable, and highly performant in general. Statistics. And then that's something I could collect from those NSP to put it in writing as a kind of summary. But yes, the early feedback was very good performance in overall.
Okay. I think we lost your picture, but I'm sure we can get it back. Moving on, if you don't mind, to the next item is under the security aspect. Martin, back to you. Probably something complex for your description, but are there any specifics you want to highlight about cybersecurity?
No, obviously, just to say, cybersecurity is obviously a concern for everybody in every industry, and our approach is defense in depth, various different security measures. We have a number of in-depth measures to address cybersecurity, from physical, technical, procedural measures, from people vetting, limited access, private logical address configuration, control plane measures, layers of defense, really. We treat then the network WAN connections that are kind of outside of our control. We treat them, the external private IP, VP WAN links that we get from telcos, as untrusted, and use our own encryption and tunneling within their tunneling. Also, we'd have no remote access allowed at present into our operational network, and we have physical isolation from the internet. And then from a product perspective, we rely on Nokia's software assurance testing and their NGE encryption across our WAN links. So our approach to cybersecurity is defense in strength in depth, various different measures that can possibly be taken, and also, of course, in compliance with the security standards that are being applied all the time from NIST and NIST2 coming.
Okay. One of the things that as you mentioned there, not providing any external access, which is fantastic, but of course, as we move forward into the next evolution of systems with FFIs and all these other things and the connectivity, I think there's probably going to be more concerns over cybersecurity on that. But that's just commentary.
Yeah.
Burham, do you see overall attacks increasing when it comes to the ANSP networks?
From my conversation with ANSPs, clearly yes. Of course, the way to mitigate those, the traditional ways, I would say, to mitigate those is to try to isolate the ANSP networks from the internet. That indeed mitigates a lot of risks. However, ATM networks are more and more interconnected with other ATM stakeholders, be it airlines, airport, med agencies, military organization, Eurocontrol, adjacent ANSPs, etc., stream platform, and moving to the cloud-based environment, so that all these interfaces increase the number of interfaces where a cybersecurity threat may occur. So being isolated from the internet is not the only answer. And on top of that, there is also the non-operational IT infrastructure that is also present for non-operations. And more we see non-operational network interconnecting with the operational network via a kind of dual firewalling, dual vendor system. and that creates still a threat. And in other words, another important thing is that ANSPs are becoming more and more visible on the public, from the public perspective, and is known to be possibly perturbating the whole global economies if not available, and therefore is more and more prone to global and persistent attacks to try to let's say, destroy some economies, or let's say create some impact on economies. So, and the risk is, of course, the cost efficiency to try to use public links such as Starlink, and even the ATM CESAR research tries to develop a hybrid connectivity architecture solution, whereby you will have IP security based tunnels over those public links or non-safety links, and that will again increase cybersecurity risks. So definitely yes, it is increasing, and it will keep increasing.
Right, and you touched on something that I was sort of alluding to. When SWIM is where we're going to be, and we need to be to actually support the new flight plan. So FFI's flight plan to support Wixom for weather, and I listen. AIM for AIS services, for all the different services, that's where we're going. And with that, one of the things that the conversation back at ICAO is clearly, what about the cyber risks? How do we actually mitigate any kind of security risks with that regard? Benoit, one question for you is, does Nokia have devices that can support MPLS over IPsec? If we want to use Starlink, we have remote sites that cannot be reached by fiber or service providers. Is that something that your company is doing?
Yes, we can do that. We've got technology to be able to transport MPLS over IP, yes, and IPsec, yes.
Oh, okay. I hope that answers the question. And then, how are stakeholders, for all three of you, if you want to comment, how are stakeholders addressing the topic of cybersecurity insurance in the ANSP sphere? Is that something that's available, or is it something that you've actually looked into? And I'll start with Martin. Kind of something I didn't think about asking.
You just want to go back to the cybersecurity question, is it?
Well, yes, but this question is, how are stakeholders addressing the topic of cybersecurity insurance? Is that something? Is that a thing?
I think what we do, I suppose the ultimate measure is we remain safe and secure, but to address that proactively, we're looking at the cybersecurity regulations that are coming out. We started to build assurance and assessment of the NIST framework under the Identify, Detect, Protect, Respond, Recover framework, and all the constituent parts that exist underneath that. So we would have had to comply with that because NIST came into Irish legislative law some time ago, and as an operator of essential services, we were being regulated by the National Cybersecurity Centre. So we would have had to put all those measures in place under that framework. Similarly, EASA are adopting the NIST framework and bringing it into European legislation and attaching it as a Part IS amendment to the current safety regulation 373 of 2017. So NIST 2 then is coming again, which is given another layer of governance, and we're proactively getting ready for that as well. And that's looking at everything from stakeholders, their assessment for cybersecurity as well. We're only as strong as our weakest link kind of approach. So the governance factor coming in with NIST 2 is something that we're looking. So our measures around cybersecurity is our ability to comply with the NIST framework and NIST 2 as it's about to be about to come into law as well. So that's our kind of our measures. from a BODAM, a national cybersecurity center auditing, and then we're going to be audited again and as well. And cybersecurity is going to be straddling both safety, which are risk assessment around cybersecurity, and also cybersecurity in its own right, that we have all the measures in place under those frameworks.
Great, thank you. Braham, you want to touch on that very briefly as far as what you find?
See, there is a European legislation that forces any infrastructure that is considered being critical to follow some European regulations, such as NIS2 or IEC 62443. And that really puts another perspective to the cybersecurity, because under NIS2, senior management becomes accountable for cybersecurity governance. And therefore, it's not anymore a technical discussion, it's a strategic business decision and discussion at top senior management level within all ANSP organizations. And that forces in practice to implement, of course, a cybersecurity operations center, to include incident management, including cyber insecurity incident in the existing processes. And even with the supply chain, we need to include cybersecurity clauses with the supply chain to make sure we don't import or introduce buggy softwares that could be prone to cybersecurity attacks when operational. And that's a challenge, because we need to balance safety, security, availability, and operational efficiency, and sometimes with contradicting constraints and requirements. And that's the challenge, to find the right balance between the measures and the control points from all these perspectives, all these angles. But the key point is we have to change the paradigm from compliance, being just compliant, to international cybersecurity standard, to be proactively really aligned at the top level of the senior management. In summary, never trust, always verify from all aspects.
Well, so on that point, I fully agree with you. Benoit, what are the efforts you're engaging with to limit the risks and the impacts? And they both mentioned this too, and then we also have IEC 62443.
So we are not compliant with these, because these are frameworks more for critical networks operators, but we contribute to this in a different way. So the first thing is that, as the ground-to-ground network is at the core of every operations, it has to be very stable. So we invest a lot in quality. Just to illustrate this, we've got, for every developer of our software in routers, we've got one tester. So this investment in quality, which is about 3 times bigger than what our competitors are doing, gives us a very high quality in the software against defect, but of course against potential attacks. So that's something that we are very proud of. We continue to invest into that, and this gives Martin hopelessly good nights and good weekends. The second thing I want to say is that on top of that, we're providing features to protect the application. So not only the network, but also the applications. I would mention 3. What we call zero trust is ensuring that if somebody enters into a radar stations, unplugs something and plugs something else, like a hacker's PC, he will be forced to authenticate, so making his penetration into the network either impossible or at least very difficult. So that's the first, protecting the access. Then if the hacker succeeds, we limit by something called zoning in the language of IEC or NIS2, so zoning or segmentation, that the hacker will be limited to one subset of the network. He won't be able to drop packets on every single application. He will be limited to one. So that is ensuring that we limit the span of a potential attack and the risks. So that's the second. And the third, we protect the application, as Martin mentioned, with encryption to ensure that the links, which are generally crossing countries and that can be accessed by anybody nearly, protect the application. So the radar systems, for example, cannot be hacked, meaning the data can't be used by anybody else. Okay, so these are the 3 measures from a pure product perspective.
Oh, thank you. There's a couple questions in the chat, but let me get back to those. Martin, I do want to ask you this. Do you see more and more safety constraints in your daily operation?
Yes. the latest regulation 2017-373 has brought a requirement for a lot more evidence-based assurance to our regulators. So there is a lot more evidence, a lot more documentation to be generated. A lot of the regulation, like it's good regulation, it's important to have, but the acceptable means of compliance sometimes has been open to interpretation and learning on both sides, and it has caused a lot more effort to be put in to develop that evidence to give the assurance that's required that this regulation is looking for. Everything from training and suppliers, cybersecurity. There's a lot more restrictions around safety. Yeah, the new regulation has been a challenge, but we're learning and we're getting there.
Right, and I assume it would have an impact on your maintenance operations too, right?
Yeah. Obviously, well, our maintenance operations, like we have kind of our routine maintenance operations, which are managed on a kind of a predefined schedule basis, and where our teams would regularly travel to remote sites and do essential equipment maintenance and power checks and failover mechanisms, and that would be kind of on a scheduled release basis. We have a kind of an A-path and B-path strategy at every site, so we're in a temporary reduced redundancy position. But in most cases, it's completely transparent to operations. As Benoit said, we have the IP MPLS network, so fast routing happens as part of that flexibility that comes with that type of a network. But upgrades to software then and new service additions, that level of release of equipment is only granted based on the evidence-based risk assessments as discussed previously. So that's where the challenge will come back into, where maintenance of the network it has to be compliant.
Right. Okay. Berhan, on which are, from your point of view, the main safety risks associated to the ground-to-ground network?
Quite a few. Mainly the availability will create a lot of safety risk. For instance, a lot of flight data exchange will create a lot of situation awareness for the controller. If we lose surveillance data, we might lose sector control capacity. Or if we delay the transfer of information, the controllers will maybe get wrong data. And if the data is even corrupted, it's even worse in terms of data integrity. And same thing, because it's also the voice. If we lose ground-ground telephony, we will reduce control capacity and implement appropriate countermeasures to remove aircraft from the sectors that are impacted, and etc. So there are many impacts on safety, and that's why the network availability is so critical, because it will really impact safety. And of course, cybersecurity as well, because a service interruption or disruption due to cybersecurity attacks will reduce capacity and availability of ATM services. So that's a known fact.
I think you've touched on a very important part there. Benoit, let me get the last question into you before we sort of try and take a few minutes for any other questions. How do you help operational teams minimize misconfigurations?
The key word here is about automation. We see a lot of networks being operated by a technician or an engineer connecting to a router, changing on the fly with some files on the side to help him with parameters, so IP addresses, quality of service parameters, etc. This is of course prone to errors because you're copy pasting things, etc. Automation is something that is gaining, of course, a lot of traction because you create programs that will configure your router on their own, taking data from files. So as it's fully automated, you can test it in a lab before and roll it out very quickly on the field. So automation is really a key word to ensure that there are less errors in the day-to-day operations and changes.
Okay, and I'm going to give you each time for one more question. I think we're going to be ending soon, but Benoit, I'll stick with you. What lessons has Nokia learned from deploying telecom infrastructure in other mission critical sectors like rail, utilities, defense, and that they may apply to ANSPs also?
I think the first thing is, well, a couple of things. So the first is by far availability, as we've talked a lot about all time. So we build networks for power utilities which are controlling the grid in a country. This gives us, of course, a lot of responsibility because it's the most critical network. If there is no electricity, there is nothing else. And of course, with rail and defense and ANSPs, we also manage networks that are as well less critical, but very, very critical. As generally telling to railways, the difference between a rail and an NSP. In rail, you can stop trains when there is no network. In NSPs, it's more difficult to stop a plane. So we learn a lot about this. The second thing I would say is life cycle. So life cycle of applications, meaning that you have in NSP or in other business applications that are there to last for 20 years. And so we need to integrate that onto the network by providing the right interfaces, etc. And the second thing, our products need to last long. So we don't have traditional IT life cycles of 5 years. We are more in the 10, 15 years plus. So that's again, I think the two lessons that we have learned from these very critical networks.
I think ANSPs appreciate that, especially the last comment. We need longer lasting life cycles.
Yeah.
On what capabilities will separate leading ANSPs from lagging ones by 2030 and 2030, 2034, whichever date you want to use, because that's when FFIs and the cessation of Flight Plan 2012, so many things will happen by that time.
Good question. In fact, I still it's the people that will make the difference because the technological trends in telecommunication is just accelerating more and more.
Right.
And so we need the right people in terms of high qualification, well-trained technical and management teams to be at the forefront of emerging technologies that will make the difference. And other ANSPs that do not have maybe the size of the teams will have more and more challenges to really cope with the keeping operational system while at the same time taking advantage of these emerging technologies. So maybe something to consider is leveraging or mutualizing on the experts amongst ANSPs to share their competencies amongst several, because that will be the challenge to the people. That's purely a personal belief.
I fully agree with you, and I think that's something that's going to come up now as we all look towards minimum implementation paths and stuff like that, with GAMP and systems and this and that. So the consideration is going to be all of that, and then we get into which systems do we need, right? So Martin, you get the last question. What are the biggest barriers NSPs face in modernization projects? And I sort of listed it a little bit, but what do you see as the biggest barriers?
For modernization projects, is it?
Yes.
Yeah, so well, again, just to echo what Burhan said, it's the technical expertise for emerging technologies. We'd have the challenges of the regulatory compliance in a heavily regulated environment. We'd have to ensure there's sort of be a lot of testing, a lot of evidence-based, a lot of analysis. So the two items that come to mind is regulatory compliance and the technical staff to be able to support the new systems.
Yeah, fully agree with that. And I think I have 5 minutes left. If there's any other questions from the attendees, I'm looking at the chat. There's been a couple that have rolled through, but as we wait for potential questions, I will say this. I think as I sort of started, resiliency. That's something that, as I said, ICAO is keenly aware of the challenges with that, the systems, the amount of conversation that's taking place. You all touched on different aspects of it, whether it be the connectivity issues, the redundancy issues, whether or not we have dual cores. One of the things that I didn't ask was regarding legacy systems. This, if you recall, a couple of years ago, it was all about can we get rid of NDBs? Can we do this? Can we do that? And then we had GNSS RFI issues, and then quickly it became, wait, we need to keep some systems in place. So we get back to the minimum operational network. And now we have required operational network. And that is something that the ICAO surveillance panel is looking at specifically as to what systems do we really need to keep, that without those, the possibility of a GNSS RFI event which spoofs aircraft, it would have the largest impact. So with that in mind, and I have a minute and 24 seconds, so I'll give you each 24 seconds. I'll start with you, Benoit. In your mind, as far as when it comes to resiliency, what is the one object that we can just not give up on? The one system that we need to keep?
Of course, as a network vendor, I would say the network needs to be there. The good thing is that it can really onboard any kind of application and provide the application with what is their expectations in terms of availability. So we again continue to invest into those markets as Nokia and fulfill the requirements of high availability.
Okay, Berham, your thoughts?
The process is to ensure continuity, because as long as you modernize, you need to make sure that what runs keeps running to avoid any interruption from when migrating to modern technology. So the right approach in terms of procedures and safety regulations to ensure continuity while modernizing.
Okay, Martin.
Yeah, just before, just echo what you were saying about getting rid of old technology. Like, there was a big push to get rid of primary radar until events that happened in America we needed to keep primary radar because you can't turn off the transponder, so to speak, on that one. But as a network user or network implementer, I would say the network as well. Keeping a secure, resilient network infrastructure, kind of like nothing works without networks. So getting that right is important.
Right, and that's probably going to be one of the biggest challenges, right, for cost and everything else for ANSPs. Interoperability is another thing I didn't touch on, and I know I'm out of time, but hopefully it won't end on me. But interoperability, harmonization of systems, like I said, swim cloud activities, and then connectivity. We're not going to be able to have a global system if we can't ensure resiliency and connectivity across the board, especially as we move forward. And with that, I'll look to our host if I needed to link it back to them. Other than that, I'll just say thank you. Thank you all for your time. Thank you for allowing us to go ahead and have this opportunity to talk about this. There's probably so much more we can do, and we'll see. Maybe we can have it a sort of an add-on or a follow-on where we can talk more about systems and everything else that we have going on. Thank you again.